All right, guys, here we go. Oops. So this is what we worked on yesterday. Again, don't worry if you don't have this huge level of detail. Just real quickly, though, the goal for this week is just to know a little bit about each one of the kingdoms. So if we kind of go backwards from down here where we started yesterday, Archaea, in the thing where it says description, and so they're single-celled, they're prokaryotes, and I've got this on the next sheet, the definition of some of these, but prokaryote means what? It means they're very simple cells with no nucleus. The only two kingdoms, and don't worry, this is a big idea that we're going to learn over the next couple weeks. The two kingdoms that are the simplest and the oldest and the tiniest have prokaryotic cells. They don't have a nucleus. They do have DNA, but the DNA is just floating around in the cytoplasm. And so in both of these categories, the archaea and the bacteria, by the way, these used to be all one kingdom, but recently scientists have separated them, really just in the last 5 or 10 years. In both cases, they're single-celled, they're prokaryote. In both cases, some are autotrophs and some are heterotrophs. And remember, we talked about that autotrophs make their own food, heterotrophs eat other things, usually decomposers. The big difference in these two is where they live. The archaea live in extreme environments. They live in hot springs like in Yellowstone. They live in hot ocean vents, salty areas, places that no other living thing could live. And it turns out they were probably the first living things on Earth because they could live in these places. Bacteria, these are the bacteria that live on your skin, on your food, inside you, outside you. They live everywhere that other living things can live. So that's the big difference of those two. So the odd thing, and again, guys, next week we're going to talk a lot about the bacteria, so don't worry about the other details. But yeah, the textbook says that the archaea live in cow intestines. The weird thing about that is bacteria live in our intestines, and they help us digest our food. The reason you can digest things like plant matter is because you have bacteria to help you digest it. Okay, on our very quick checklist, protist. The two main things you need to know about the protist are they are single-celled, they are true cells with a nucleus, and the big thing about the protists is they're the things that don't fit into other groups. And so there's 3 types of protists: plant-like protists, animal-like, and I should say fungus-like. And so obviously the plant-like protists do photosynthesis, the fungi-like protists decompose. These are the types of things, they always live in moist or wet environments, so they live in the ponds. Okay, then these other 3 you already know quite well, and we'll go over them later. The big thing about these 3 is all 3 of these are multicellular, and they're big. They're multicellular and complex. That means they have cells and tissues and organ systems. So much more complicated. Okay, and I think these 3 I'm not really as worried about. You know examples of animals, plants, and fungi, and we know from our board that we sorted up there that people know most of that stuff. Don't worry about the rest of the detail. The main thing is just knowing a little bit about what makes each kingdom. Okay, make sure you have a little bit of detail about each, and we shall move on. Why are mushrooms fungi, not plants? What's the big difference in these two groups? Who knows? Big, huge difference. Yes, the big difference is how they get their energy. Fungi are actually heterotrophs, or fungi, either way is correct. They're decomposers, they break down dead things. And plants, of course, are autotrophs, they make their own food. So these absolutely have to have light to survive. Fungi actually like damp, darker places. Direct sunlight will actually kill fungi. Okay? Excellent. Let's move on to the Batcave. This, and again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You should know these terms. If you don't know them, we'll go over them in a lot of detail over the next couple weeks. But so single-celled, multi-celled, prokaryotic, which we just said, eukaryotic have the true cells, autotroph, heterotroph. So again, if you have no idea about these words, they're in the flip lesson, they're in the textbook. We're going to use them a lot as we talk about each kingdom. So now, let's move that so you can see that if you need to. And if you really need to, I can give you a handout of it, but you should know this stuff. Okay, so now this is the important stuff for today. Let's put a little screen shade up here so we, screen shade. Okay. So classification, as you know, is putting things in groups based on similarities. Although, by the way, notice how it says write this down? You should be writing this down. So classification, again, putting things into groups based on similarities. And we've been doing this all week already. We took the organism cards and we put them in groups based on similarities. We know the plants are green. They're classified based on how they get their energy. And we just talked about the other kingdoms. They're put in groups based on similarities, like how they get their food, how they get their energy. Are they multicellular or single-celled? And to some extent, where do they live? So that's what we'll be doing. Then the other two words you saw with Tim and Moby, brain pop. And for the brain pop, you can always go back and watch it. It was the brain pop on classification. Remember that you can also watch that from your, like from Gmail. You can find the brain pop. Taxonomy, we won't talk about this a lot, but you'll see the word. It's basically the scientific study of classifying, not an especially important word. And then dichotomous key. You're going to use a dichotomous key today in one of our activities. Does anyone know what the prefix di means? Two. Okay? And like a dichotomy means two things put next to each other, two things compared. And in a dichotomous key, it's basically a flow chart with yes, no answers. And it's how you classify things. So it would be like if you wanted to classify the people in this class, you could make a little dichotomous key and you could say, is it a boy or a girl? And so if it's a boy, you can say, okay, this person's a boy, and do they have brown eyes or not brown eyes? And if they have brown eyes, then you could say, and so you go through this whole classification key, and then ultimately you can figure out exactly who you're talking about. We do the same thing when we classify plants and animals to figure out what plant or animal you're talking about. Everybody got that? Almost? Excellent. Now, you may remember from August when we learned this. I don't remember at this point how much we went over it, and maybe you don't either. But the classification system that we use now to classify all living things is this. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, but you start with domain, and then kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. You don't have to write this down yet. We're going to come back to it in just a minute. But all living things are known by their scientific name, which is their genus and their species. You remember that? And that's in the brain pop we watched. They were talking about the dolphins. Remember? It was, what was it? Delphinius. Is that what it was? Because I know you guys were repeating it over and over, so you knew the dolphin. So Carolus Linnaeus, and they all seem like they're in Greek because it's Greek and Latin words. So Carolus Linnaeus, and he actually changed his name, the reason it sounds like genus and species, because his name was actually Carol something, and so he made it Carolus Linnaeus, so it sounds like it's binomial nomenclature, which is pretty funny and actually pretty darn geeky. But anyways, binomial, bi also means two, nomial means name, so two, name, whoops. And nomenclature is a naming system, so it's the two-name naming system. So when we use our two-name naming system, everything has two names, But you can also, from this two-name naming system, you can tell something about the living thing, right? Because if I say Canis lupus, do you guys remember what Canis lupus is? It's a dog or wolf. Just plain Canis lupus is generally the wolf. Tim and Moby told us that Canis lupus familiaris is the domesticated dog. So what do you think Canis latrans is? A lizard, a cat. Wait, but it's Canis. So it's a canine. It is still a dog in the dog family. This is actually a coyote. Oh. See? And Canis, I think it's I don't remember exactly what it is, but a fox has a very similar name. Okay? Yeah. And somebody said we're learning Spanish here. Yes. This is actually very similar. Spanish is a Latin-based language. So is French. So is Italian. And so all of these have, you'll see a lot of these similarities, right? And of course, Felis, the cat family. Felis domesticus, so that is the domesticated cat. Felis concolor is what? Yeah, so this is the puma, mountain lion. This is an example they use a lot because puma, mountain lion, cougar, these are all names for the exact same animal. And in different parts of the country, different parts of North America, we call it different things. So mountain lion. Well, you know, that's a good question. It says, why don't we just call it the cougar instead of having a, well, the thing is that in different places, so like in Mexico and in Arizona, these areas, it's called the puma because that's what the native people called it. Around here, we call them mountain lions. In other parts of the United States, they call them cougars because they just named things that they saw. But the scientists now say, well, look, these are all the exact same thing. So even though you have the common name that you call it, there's the name that the scientists call it. So then you can say, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. That kind of makes sense? Thank you for that fabulous example. So, well, right, because science is a worldwide community. And so if you are working with scientists from all over the place, of course, we'd like to say, no, you should use my name because it's best, right? No, right. So we use the common language of science. And also, sometimes the common language of science actually gives you some description as well. Did anyone, so Canis lupus, do you guys recognize the word lupus at all? Lupine? Yes, from Harry Potter. Silly but true, they use a lot of Latin words in that, right? Professor Lupine, who is actually a werewolf. Lupine means wolf-like. Yes, yes. Oh, nice. Excellent. No, and so if you know these little things, it's really fun. But the other thing about science, if you know the Greek and Latin words, which I'm going to give you a set of prefixes, Greek and Latin prefixes, if you know them, then you can tell something about the animal. So for instance, there's a group of animals called pachyderms. No, it's not a rodent. What are pachyderms? I don't know if anteaters are in this group, but you know what is in this group? Okay, so is there any, guys, is there any part of this word that you recognize? Pachyderm. Derm, what's derm? Dermatologist. Dermis, skin. Taxidermy. Excellent. So skin. And I have to tell you, I was at the zoo one year with the seventh graders, and I'm like, pachyderm. I'm like, derm means skins. What does pachy mean? And guess what? The zoo volunteer had no idea. So I came home and looked it up. You know what pachy means? Good guess. Somebody said rough. It actually means thick. So they're thick skinned. And then I'm like, oh, that makes sense because one of my favorite dinosaurs is the pachycetus. Cephalosaurus. What is that? Well, right? So pachy means thick. Does anyone know what cephalo means? Encephalitis? Head. And saurus means lizard or dinosaur. So the Pachycephalosaurus is the thick-headed dinosaur, and they have those plates on their heads, and they butt heads, you know, with the little, yeah, see? And of course, Tyrannosaurus Rex. Tyranna, so, I don't know, spelling right. So Rex means king. Rex means king, and Tyranna means terrible, like tyrant. So it's terrible lizard king. Terrible lizard king, the biggest, meanest dinosaur. So anyway, all right, one last thing, and then we'll go on to our activities for today. Okay? All right, so last of all, now I do want you to write this down. So when we classify things, Carolus Linnaeus started this system with genus and species, which is the scientific name of things. So the genus and species is the scientific name. And then we now know, right? We've spent this week talking a little bit about the 6 kingdoms. Every living thing fits into one of the 6 kingdoms that we're spending the whole quarter talking about. And just not that long ago, just probably 5-10 years ago, scientists have being able to look at the genetics and the DNA and the chemistry that makes up the cells. They have further looked evolutionarily at how things are related, and they have made a higher thing called domains. And there are 3 domains. And it's actually so weird. The 3 domains are archaea. So the archaea is a domain and a kingdom. The bacteria are a domain and a kingdom. And then the eukarya is everything else. The eukarya have true cells with nucleus. So the eukarya are the protists, fungus, plants, and animals. But what this is saying is that the archaea and the bacteria are just so totally different evolutionarily and how they get their energy and what their cells are made of. So 3 domains, 6 kingdoms, and then each kingdom has many phyla. Each phylum has many classes, order, family, genus, species. And in terms of animals, in the animal kingdom, there's about 35 phyla, and each phyla has a whole bunch of classes. So one phylum could be vertebrates, things with backbones. And then you get down here, mammals are a class, and then order is going to be things like carnivores. Do that off the top of my head. It might not be exactly right. But so kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. How are you going to remember that? Okay. Well, we could sing a song, but we're not going to sing a song. Instead, this is the way I was taught to remember. Okay. So, and maybe tomorrow, well, one thing you can do is you can make up your own little thing. Last year, the kids made up hilarious things. I learned it, and of course, when I learned it in middle school, they didn't have domain. So we just learned kings play chess on Friday, generally speaking. Okay? And honestly, until I started teaching this every year, that's still how I remembered it. I had to go do kings play chess on Friday. I'm like, on Friday, order, family, genus, species. So you can do this. You can make up your own. We're not going to spend time with that right now because I want you to do the other activity. But this is something else you can do. Kids came up with some hilarious ones last year. Find a way to remember it, because I promise you on the quiz and on the unit test, Usually it's multiple choice, but I will give you a question and say, list the levels of classification from biggest to smallest. Or I'll say, here's a list, is it in the correct order? And so you do need to know that. Yeah, I would just write this one down for now. Oh, well, if you write it down, so what you have to do is you have to write, do kings play chess on Fridays, generally speaking, and then right next to it, you have to write kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. The good way to do it is just to go like this. You go, okay, uh, do kings play chess on Friday, generally speaking, and then put in the right classification. Phylum. There you go, piece of cake. All right, so that's our 20-minute flipped lesson for today. Let's go on to our fabulous activity.